Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Vertigo. This film came out in 1958 and it was directed by Alfred Hitchcock. This is, in my opinion, Hitchcock's greatest work and easily one of the greatest Hollywood movies ever made. Hitchcock made a career out of making movies that expose the truth behind this artifice, this very seemingly well-mannered society, in showing us disturbing character traits and brutality and all of these things that are simmering underneath this conditioned exterior. And it was often kind of hard for us to digest as viewers, but we couldn't turn away because the films were just so well done, so entertaining, and so just manipulative the way it pulls the strings. I've said this before, but I always feel like my personal favorite movies are the ones that use the movie medium in a way where it's kind of transcending the medium, and I talked about that when I reviewed Oldboy last week, but movies that are very aware of its own manipulative devices, and it kind of makes a commentary on the very act of filmmaking. And this is what Hitchcock was able to achieve in Vertigo. He pushed himself further. He exposed a lot of his own weaknesses, his own psychological weaknesses, and his own indulgence by kind of holding up a mirror to himself. He's exploring human nature and how that leads to so many of our flaws and so many of our misguided desires. Because when you have a typical Hollywood movie, it's very entertaining, we get a lot out of it, but when you really kind of strip away a lot of the entertainment factors, you realize that there is a lot of hatred, a lot of misogyny underneath, and all these deep desires that come from such confliction and loneliness, and we kind of project that onto the screen. The plot of Vertigo is about a guy named Scotty, and this is played by James Stewart. He plays a retired private investigator who actually comes out of retirement for his old college friend that he reunites with named Gavin Elster. Gavin asks Scotty, because he's a friend and he knows him, to spy on his wife. He thinks that his wife is being possessed by some sort of spirit, and he's kind of sees that she has very peculiar behavior. So he wants Scotty to kind of follow her, see what she does, where she goes, and try to pick up the pieces from there. Scotty agrees, and he ends up following the wife. The wife's name is Madeline. It's played by Kim Novak. And he becomes increasingly more entranced by her beauty, her intrigue. He eventually becomes obsessive and kind of deranged, as you'll see as the film progresses. But I would say on a basic level, that's a very superficial level, that is the plot. I'm leaving out a lot of information that comes up later that's very important, but that's all you need to know for now. I think that James Stewart was just brilliant casting because he, at the time, he was kind of the Tom Hanks of his day, the everyman, somebody that just seemed so good-natured. He always played those heroes that you could root for in the movies. And so really what Hitchcock is doing here is he is casting somebody that is sort of playing himself. He's representing not only Hitchcock, but the audience's subconscious, all of these inner desires that we are often afraid to confront. And I think it was, again, great casting because this is somebody that you would not suspect to have this darkness in them, this anger. And it's really unsettling how easy it is for Stewart to transition between this kind of kind-natured man into something that you don't expect. And I think, it's one of my favorite performances ever. And I love when you can take somebody that seems like a model citizen and really expose a lot of these inner, this darkness that's underneath, because nobody is perfect. Nobody is a perfect role model. We all have our flaws and our secrets. Seeing it through the eyes of Stewart just makes everything seem very strange and not quite right. And it's really evident just in his eyes, what comes through his eyes and in his performance. It's really well done. Hitchcock builds the aesthetic of the film in a way to where it appears almost like it is Scotty's dream. It's very hypnotic and very trippy, actually. It messes with your mind very intentionally. And Mulholland Drive, which I did review, I think about a year ago, that film, that's my favorite movie of all time, and it is heavily, heavily influenced by Vertigo, and it's easy to see once you rewatch them. There are a lot of parallels between how both films kind of set you up with a certain plot, and then that's something that's very kind of digestible and romantic and intriguing. And with this film, though, I think it's kind of funny how very over the top it is. It's very melodramatic, and it's almost as if Hitchcock is making fun of himself and making fun of so many of those Hollywood conventions. Even with the casting of Kim Novak, she is just she has this quality about her that is just very stereotypical of kind of the cookie cutter Hitchcock blonde in a suspense thriller. And she's, you know, very sensual and bewitching, all of those things that we're so used to seeing. We've seen a million times, especially from Hitchcock himself. It's like Hitchcock is so aware of those conceits, so he builds them up in a way so that when he's able to take the rug out from underneath you, you feel it all the more. And we do fall for it. And we fall for it even though so many of the warning signs appear throughout the movie, especially in the color palette. We see a lot of kind of dark reds, like scarlet reds, especially when when he sees Madeline for the first time. It's got a very kind of erotic, like lust feeling to it because of that redness. But yet there's also kind of this sign of warning, like it's a warning sign that something is not right. It's this idea of misguided temptation. And the same thing goes with the greens. You see a lot of greens that you see with Madeline in lighting and in her wardrobe, the color of her car. And there's that swirl in her hair. She has her hair done where there's this swirl. You see that a lot throughout the movie. I mean, it's in the opening sequence with that kind of vortex, that spiraling quality, and the staircase as well that you see. So it's like hypnosis almost. He's hypnotized by her and he's spiraling out of control. And all of us are drawn in and kind of falling for these kind of distortive devices. And even though everything we know in the first half of the film is really a lie, and it's a lie to Scotty as well, I mean, it's so good. That's the thing is, like, I mean, I know this is typical. Everybody says this, but it's true. I'll reiterate how great of a filmmaker Hitchcock really was. I mean, his use of the camera and the way that he lets a shot linger at the perfect time. He'll show a shot and it says so much visually that people don't have to say with words or in multiple shots. It's just pitch perfect. And yet beneath all of that, there's something so achingly rich and very painful that it's almost uncomfortable. And the musical score by Bernard Herrmann, it's one of the greatest scores I've ever heard in my life. I adore Bernard Herrmann. I think it's probably the best score he ever wrote. And that's really saying a lot because he wrote so many great works. But it's so enigmatic and very melodramatic. It's very, as I said, almost stereotypical, you know, the way that Hitchcock is doing things that's so over the top. The score is that way too. It's very sweeping, romantic, yet there's this richness and this aching pain beneath it that when you listen to it, it's almost painful for the listener. It's a depressing experience, but yet a necessary one. And that pain lurking beneath the film's exterior is so important because it serves as the basis for the film throughout, so that when it finally jerks you out of this fantasy and into reality, there's that continuing thread. And the truth is not what we want to see. It's not what Scotty wants to see either. The truth hurts because it's real. It's not a fantasy. And I have to talk about the character Midge. I think that she is such an underrated character, always overlooked. I never see her talked about in any sort of analysis or review or whatever for this film, but she is such an important person in Scotty's life. She plays basically his best friend. She's basically the antithesis of the Kim Novak character. She's not some gorgeous, unattainable object. She's a real woman. She's very maternal towards Scotty. She cares about him very, very much, and he really trusts her. And there's a specific scene in the film that just breaks my heart every time I see it. And again, this is not one that is talked about very often. I honestly think it's the most painful scene. And that's saying a lot because there's a lot of painful scenes to watch in this movie, but it's the painting scene. So one of the main red herrings in the film is the Carlotta Valdez portrait, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if you've seen the film. It's kind of part of what really entices Scotty into this mystery that he's trying to crack. And she gets a hold of an image of the Carlotta portrait that's in a museum, so she decides to recreate it. She repaints it, but instead of putting Carlotta, the beautiful Carlotta, she puts herself in place. And she does it as sort of a joke, hoping that Scotty will see it and think it's very amusing. But when he sees it, he is not amused at all. In fact, he seems very offended by it to the point where he immediately is just, he's like, I gotta go. That's not funny. And it's so sad to me because it encapsulates everything that this movie's about It's about the fact that he just can't accept reality. That she is not part of this artifice that he has fallen for. And when he is confronted with the truth, he can't handle it. He sees Carlotta and Madeline as these hypnotic figures that he's trying to pursue, but he can't accept a real woman who may not be as beautiful, but she's right there in front of him, somebody that he can trust, and he kind of just pushes her to the side. She is not part of the fantasy, and she's also not part of the second half of the film, which is very important because that is where Scotty really has gone beyond the point of no return. And the second half is interesting to me because in a lot of ways, it is really a metaphor for Hollywood. And I think Kim Novak also, she does not get enough credit for her performance in this movie because she's really playing two roles here. She's playing the part of Madeline, who is not really real, and then she's playing Judy, and Judy is the real person, who she really is. And she's almost unrecognizable in that second half, I think. And just everything about her, the way her voice changes, the way her mannerisms physically, everything is so different, and she does it effortlessly. It's almost as if Judy is the actress. And I mean that metaphorically, it's also literally, but then you can look at Scotty almost as the director in a sense, because he's practically auditioning her for the role of Madeline. He sees her, he recognizes her, thinks she, reminds him of Madeline. And so he starts to change her. He changes her appearance, her clothes, her hair, her makeup. He has this idea of what he wants her to be, this porcelain, perfect illusion that is Madeline. And he's so obsessed with that beauty that he just can't accept Judy for who she is. And she's just really an average girl. And the heartbreaking thing about that, though, is that she goes along with it. It's a very abusive relationship in a sense because she falls for the illusion just as he does. She is so blindly in love that she will sacrifice her own identity for him. She will allow him to change her because she wants to be that perfect thing that he wants. And when she finally becomes Madeline, at least in terms of her outward appearance, it's spectacular. She opens the door of the bathroom and that she's shrouded in that green light. It's the spellbinding sequence where fantasy meets reality. And I love when the camera is going around them as they have that kiss and the way the music just swells. It's perfect. One thing about movies that I've talked about before, and I would say more often than not Hollywood movies, is how they are this great dichotomy. Yes, film is an art. Yes, movies can tell us so much about the world, so much about ourselves in ways that other art forms can't. But at the same time, there's something about it that is often very faux. Everything is pigeonholed into these narratives. There's an arc and oftentimes a very neat and tidy ending. And you've got these beautiful actresses and beautiful actors and the music and the costumes. And it's so easy to get swept up in that. We too start to want the happy endings. We too start to want the knight in shining armor or the damsel in distress. But that is not what real life is. So even though this is an art form and it has so many great things about it, there are elements in it that really create our own unhappiness without us even realizing it. And this is what Hitchcock is really trying to show us here. He is looking at the gray area between fantasy and truth and how easily it is to fall into these traps to the point where we can lose ourselves. And that to me is just the great commentary on film. And I think that, as I said, this is just a perfect film. If you haven't seen this film, I don't know why you would have watched this review, but if you haven't seen it, you're really doing yourself a disservice. Go see it right now. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, the link is below. You can also like my Facebook page and link below that. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.